It's time. It's time. It's time. And Veronica had texted me to say that we didn't have. Yeah. Okay. Welcome, everyone. We'll begin with a land acknowledgement, and in this case, in my own words. I acknowledge that I live and work on Treaty 6 territory and the ancestral lands of the Métis. I offer my respect and deep gratitude to the Nehiawag, Nmeskekawag, Nehitao, Lakota, Nakoda, Dakota, Soto, Anishinaabe, Dene, and Métis, past, present, and future ancestors of this land, because these lines are not of the past, but hold great futurity. Knowing that the past is the present and the future too, I wish to affirm our relationship with one another and seek to deepen its connection as one of legitimate reciprocity, bounded in the simultaneous action of learning and unlearning as we come to know what it means to be responsible and planetary in our interconnection. With this intention stated clearly, I'm happy to welcome you to Making Public, an annual program of research presentations by our MFA candidates as they prepare for their theses. In the fine arts, the thesis takes the form of an exhibition. Talk and text are only methodologies that support and engage what we do. As a practice-based form of research, artists make thinking and think-making. It's my pleasure to introduce MFA candidate Gabriela Chimenska-Hauk. Sorry, I wasn't going to say the last part, Chimenska. Excuse me. Again, with the names, now I'm nervous. So, Gabriela Chimenska, and this is the last of our 4 candidates presenting this year, so it's also a particularly exciting moment as the spring arrives. I think this is spring 2.0. We'll still get April storm, but we've got this now and we can hold it tight. So, I've been Gabriela's supervisor for 1 year. She began her MFA program with Jennifer Crane, who had instructed her actively throughout her BFA. So it was my pleasure to join in the process of Gabriela's development. Gabriela is a highly focused and disciplined person, not only in her artistic practice, but in all of her pursuits. This way of living ensures a high caliber of formal consideration and material output that is seemingly unbounded by temporal limits. I really don't know how she does some of it. She's willing to sacrifice much to deepen the connection between her subjects of choice, whether they're human beings or conceptual strategies. This work ethic informs everything that she does and has allowed her research exceptional depth, whether developing personal and reciprocal connections with cultural communities or seeking insight into neuroscience and brain imaging. She builds the relationships required to begin her inquiry. This exceptional capacity for making space for investigation leads to complex multimedia explorations that remain rooted in her cultural formation. I know Gabriela will be expanding on exactly this, so I prefer us to listen to her words. I've been grateful for our time learning alongside, and I invite you all to welcome her warmly today as she shares with us her trajectory over these past months. Gabriela?
Thank you. Wow, that was quite the introduction, Jake. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I just wanted to say good afternoon to everybody who's joining online as well as in the room. I really appreciate you taking the time joining me today. I know that it does take a lot to make your way here and take time out of your regular schedule. I guess I should just start with saying that I am really honored to present my Master of Fine Arts Research, The Shape of a Memory, How We Hold Time and Form. I stand before you today on behalf of the School for the Arts, which over the past 2 years has not been just my academic institution, but at times a second home, a psychological labyrinth, and during particularly stressful weeks, a haunted house filled with deadlines that whisper my name at 3 a.m. For me, this program has not just been about the work I produce, but about understanding the process, learning how to research, and most importantly, how to slow down. During my undergraduate years, I operated at roughly 35% efficiency. Then I became a parent, and somehow that number skyrocketed to 120%. This program was my way of unlearning overproduction, rediscovering the art of questioning and re-examining rather than just simply creating. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to breathe this in and truly express my deepest gratitude. If there's one thing that I've learned about memory, is that how we acknowledge a moment shapes the way we remember it. First, to my family, thank you for your love and patience. You have nourished my soul to pursue the things that truly matter to me. To the faculty and technical support staff, thank you for your guidance and for somehow keeping up with the intellectual roller coaster that has brought me here today. Your encouragement has helped me transform fragmented thoughts into a body of work I am proud to share. To my students, teaching as a TA in drawing and photography was my absolute favorite part of this program. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your creative journeys, for your curiosity and reminding me that art is just as much about asking questions as it is about answering them. And finally, to my cohort. Our discussions, debates, and yes, our excessive food consumption were perfect, and I wouldn't change a thing. In the first year of my MFA, I was placed alongside 3 extraordinary women from the same region of the world, and you have been my first real journey to Iran. Now, let's discuss time, memory, and why our brains insist on preserving the most embarrassing moments of our lives while conveniently erasing where we placed our keys within 5 minutes. My presentation today will mirror the nature of memory, fragmented, nonlinear, and selective. I have chosen pieces of my work that will guide you through my process of remembering, weaving together key moments and ideas in a way that moves back and forth through time. I want to talk about how we are all archives of archives that came before us. Indulge me for a moment. Imagine if you could give your most significant memory a physical shape. What would it be? Would it be solid, heavy, something you can hold in your hands? Or would it be fluid, shifting, slipping away as you try to grasp it? Memory is not just something that we store in our minds. It resides in our bodies, our surroundings, the objects we touch, and the spaces that we inhabit. It lingers in a photograph, in the scent of something half forgotten, in a song that unexpectedly transports you back to a version of yourself you can barely recognize. This idea that memory retains form and that we shape it even as it shapes us is central to my artistic research. You ask what drives my work. The answer is rooted in 2 deeply significant aspects of my life. First, many goodbyes, the constant movement, the leaving and returning only to depart once more. Each farewell to people and places fractured me, scattering pieces of myself across different times and spaces. Like Voldemort's Horcruxes, I exist in numerous places at once, embedded in people, objects, and memories, yet never fully belonging to any single one. I live in multiple lives, multiple temporalities, never able to completely experience just one. The second is an innate awareness I have carried since childhood. I never truly felt like a child, surrounded by adults at all times. I was always hyper-conscious, acutely present, as if I had skipped the stage of youthful oblivion. I understood even then that we are all suspended in space, shaping our lives through memory alone, building, creating, striving, only to, in the end, just let it all go. So let me approach it this way. If we indeed came to this earth with nothing and are to leave with nothing, then all of a sudden, memory becomes the most precious currency we can accumulate in our bank. I sometimes hesitate to call myself an artist, at least in the traditional sense. Instead, I see myself as a storyteller who narrates through physical media. By the time I was 18 years old, I already wrote and read and spoke in Polish, Russian, German and English, then followed with French upon my stay in Canada. At one point, my daily presence turned into constant translation and decoding of meanings, and I truly, at one point, was lost in translation. Languages started fusing, though I always knew the importance and difference that words can make. Art evolved into another language, a language of emotions where suddenly I could truly see myself and build bridges to reach things that had been out of reach before. Words and art then fused together, beginning to form a type of a memoir. And at its core, my work is driven by a desire to create an emotional connection, to forge an experience that lingers and triggers response long after it has been encountered. My upbringing in rural Poland plays a significant role in shaping my artistic practice. I recently learned that I was selected and invited to present my work this upcoming April at the 30th Annual Graduate Interdisciplinary Conference at Concordia University in Montreal. I will discuss my personal journey, past and present, and how immigration has affected my work as a graduate student. This aspect of immigration informs my practice in many ways. I was born during the waning years of communist rule, surrounded by the echoes of political transformation and cultural resilience. As a child, I was raised under the watchful eye of the Catholic Church, a presence that was both stabilizing and at times suffocating. I sketched this ever watchful eye obsessively and soon began painting it as well. Research shows that during communist-era Poland, the church served not only as a religious institution, but also as a sanctuary for cultural identity, resisting the forces of the regime. My interest in spirituality and its integration into our society has developed. I am grateful to the communities that welcomed me into their spiritual spaces to photograph. This duality of spirituality, the protector and the disciplinarian, has profoundly influenced my understanding of authority, morality, and the tension between tradition and rebellion. Although I have now lived in Canada for many years, I still identify as a Polish artist. This duality, the in-between existence, creates a constant sense of longing and guilt over having left my homeland. The roots are always pulling me back, and now I fear that this will never disappear. The memory won't allow it. Growing up in Poland, a country where nationalism, defined as a profound love and commitment to one's homeland, has historically been intertwined with cultural identity, has significantly influenced both my personal development and artistic practice. In Poland, nationalism is frequently expressed through the triad of God, honor, and motherland, a phrase deeply embedded in the nation's history of political struggle, foreign occupation, and the enduring fight for sovereignty. Each of these words carries significant weight. God reflects Poland's strong connection to faith, historically a source of resilience and unity, particularly during oppression. Honor speaks to the deep sense of duty, moral integrity, and sacrifice that have defined Poland's national identity, especially in its resistance against external forces. Motherland emphasizes the bond between people and the land to which they belong, reinforcing national identity through shared language, culture, and history. The concept of motherland is particularly significant because language is one of the strongest ties to national identity, something I became acutely aware of when confronting language barriers after immigrating to Canada. This cultural foundation instilled in me a deep pride in my heritage, while also creating tensions as I navigated my identity in a new country. The themes of displacement, belonging, and identity are central to my work, shaped by my upbringing in a nationalistic environment and the experience of leaving my homeland, a decision made for me rather than by me. I also photographed this way, influenced by romanticism and my love for the land. I express my emotions about the surrounding environment, which is not always sublime or aesthetically beautiful, but it is full of symbolism. As an immigrant artist, I wrestle with this tension, pondering what it means to belong to a nation while living outside of its physical borders. This duality over time is the factual basis of why I work through storytelling in the first place. As a child, I used to draw with a pen on my skin, and I would connect all the freckles and the moles. And then I would run around the house pretending that I was a galaxy. This notion that we are all made of stardust fascinates me. I believe the memories held within our bodies truly transcend anything that existed before us. Caught between the landscape of my childhood and my present urban reality, I find myself existing in a liminal space, a space where belonging feels elusive, and so liminality, the space in between, became the foundation of my research. Memory itself is liminal. It does not exist in a single time or place. It fluctuates, rewrites itself, and it's always in transition. My work explores this by using the looping and fragmented video that you saw at the beginning of this presentation, where the time echoes, dissolves, and repeats. A recurring character in my work, a figure suspended between memory and presence, between the seen and unseen. Liminality is not just a concept, it is the very foundation of how I experience and shape memory. Now let's talk about nostalgia and its place in my work. Svetlana Boym tells us that there are two types of nostalgia. The restorative nostalgia wants to rebuild the past exactly as it was, even if that is impossible. Reflective nostalgia, characterized by a lingering longing, recognizing that the past cannot be retrieved. My work embraces reflective nostalgia, not aiming to reconstruct my past, but instead exploring the poetic essence of memory. Nostalgia is a tricky thing. It seduces us into believing that the past was somehow more accurate than the present, vibrant and complete. But memory is selective. We only hold onto fragments of past that may or may not have existed as we recall it. In my textile installation, you will see in the following few slides that I explored how nostalgia embeds itself in the body. The work magnifies the limbic system, the part of our brain that processes memory and emotion, which means that nostalgia quite literally lives in our flesh. In the journal article, Alan Sekula states the body is an archive. This statement is both poetic and slightly terrifying, because if true, my personal archive contains an unfortunate collection of questionable fashion choices and extensive record of awkward encounters. However, Sekula meant that our bodies store history in the ways that we do not always consciously recognize. A smell can pull you back decades. A song can unravel emotions. My work engages with this idea by asking, what happens when we treat the body as an archive rather than just a subject? How we move, touch, and inhabit space inscribe memory? Henri Bergson believed that memory is not a static thing. It is fluid, constantly in motion, and reshaped every time we recall it. Bergson differentiates between the quantitative time measured by external rigid clocks and qualitative time, the type of time we experience internally, expanding and contracting based on our emotions. Bergson argues that memory isn't just something we store. It's something we constantly reconstruct. Each time we recall a memory, we alter it slightly. It is like photocopying a photocopy. The image deteriorates, details blur, and eventually the memory transforms into something half true and half invented. Towards the end of last year, I began asking myself the fundamental questions: what is physical memory? Where do we store memories and how? My most recent textile installation, exhibited alongside my graduate cohort, explores the body as an archive, a living, breathing repository of memories, desires, and sensory impressions. This large-scale suspended narrative magnifies the limbic system, specifically the hippocampus, amygdala, and olfactory bulb. Three small but profoundly influential structures that shape who we are. Why the olfactory bulb? Because scent is the most visceral form of memory. The smell of pears, for example, instantly transports me back to Poland. In my installation, these visible, powerful forces, scent, texture, memory, are transformed into something tangible, immersive, and larger than life. The installation also reinforces my childhood school, which was painted a particular shade of yellow, a color that so deeply imprinted in my subconscious that it recurs in my dreams. This became part of my installation's walls, reinforcing how memory is both psychological and physical. Textile as a medium is essential to this work. Soft, porous, layered, and constructed, just like memory itself. Wire elements act as a structural and symbolic contrast, rigid and pliable, like memory's ability to be both permanent and ever-changing. And this work asks, what happens when memory is externalized? What if we could physically step inside the spaces of our past? This leads me to Marcel Proust, explored so eloquently in Voluntary Memory, now commonly known as the Proustian complex. Proust illustrates that memory is not always a conscious act, but it is often triggered by sensory experiences, taste, smell, or texture. My work aligns closely with this concept. The way memory embeds itself in the subconscious is a subject I investigate in my practice. Like Proust's Madeleine, my work draws the audience into moments where memory unfolds suddenly, revealing layers of time and emotion. The olfactory bulb plays a central role in my installation because scent, as Proust noted, can collapse time, bringing the past rushing into the present. The soft layering of textiles mimics how memories form, delicate, interwoven, sometimes obscured, sometimes intensely present. Proustian memory isn't about recreating the past. It's about experiencing its imprint on the present. My work doesn't aim to reconstruct my childhood, but to explore how memory resides in materials, in the senses, and in the body itself. My work is deeply rooted in childhood experiences, these formative years that shape our identities in ways we often recognize much later. The silence of my childhood in rural Poland was not empty, it was rich with meaning. I spent hours wandering through fields, collecting dry flowers, sketching their intricate patterns, and reading poetry that seems to echo the stillness around me. Many of these traditions seamlessly integrated into my practice, influencing how I engage with memory and belonging. My love for Madaran became central to my work. One of my projects was a collaborative piece with Indigenous powwow dancer Reina Buffalo Pachawas. This work took the form of movement, rooted in rhythm, history, and cultural storytelling. There are many kinds of dance, and this was yet another, a conversation in motion. I wanted this work to express my gratitude for the land that became my home. Relationships like dance require trust and respect. You must listen, adapt, and find harmony to move well with another. Building meaningful relationships, whether with people, places, or histories, feels like exchanging memories and energy, a fusion of experiences held together by acknowledgement and acceptance. This slower, more intentional way of living taught me that memory is woven into the textures of our daily life, in the minor rituals, in the way we move through the world, and in the details we often overlook. My work explores how the past, especially childhood, shapes us, whether we acknowledge it or not. People often ask, if you could have a superpower, what would it be? And my answer, to give every child a peaceful, loving, and respectful way to grow up. Our formative years, whether we consciously reflect on them or not, shape the world that we live in today. Through the people we become, the choices we make, and the ways we carry our experiences forward. Just imagine if every child were raised with kindness and care, how different would our world look? Research on memory and motherhood suggests that the experience of caregiving fundamentally alters the way we encode and retrieve memories. Studies in neuroscience show that pregnancy and early motherhood reshape the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for memory formation, enhancing emotional and sensory recall. This aligns with my research on how memory is inscribed into the body, extending beyond the personal into the intergenerational. As a mother, I do not just store memories, I shape them for another. The narratives I create are not only for my own, but are woven into the lived experiences of my children. My work has always been about tracing memory's form, but now I ask, how do we pass memory down? How do the objects, rituals, and gestures of caregiving become embedded in the subconscious of those who come after us? Psychologists like Daniel Stern and Alison Gopnik argue that early childhood experiences shape identity through implicit memory, memories formed before language. The scent of home, the rhythm of a mother's voice, and the texture of a familiar blanket. These elements become the foundation of child's sense of self. My work, like these early imprints, lingers in the space between presence and absence, permanence and impermanence. Motherhood has deepened my understanding of memory's materiality. The fabric, with its ability to be both porous and protective, now holds more weight in my practice. It is not just a metaphor for time, but also for care, for the unseen labor of holding and shaping another's world. My textile installations mirror this process. They are layered, soft, yet structured with both personal and collective histories. In this way, my research serves not only as a personal inquiry, but also as an exploration of how memory is constructed both socially and biologically. Just as my childhood memories influence my work, the memories I create now will endure in my children in ways I may never fully grasp. 2 years ago, I wrote a note without realizing it would become the key memory of my practice. It was triggered by a simple yet significant moment when a shiny key was placed into the hands of each graduate student, the key to our empty studios. I remember walking home, staring at that glistening key in my palm, thinking, Gabriella, what have you gotten yourself into? And so the note reads, this moment, this key existed before, in sustained dreams and expectations, but now, the key is a memory of a factual occurrence. Memory is neither a line or a circle. It is something shifting in between, an echo that never quite returns to where it began. Memory is hand-pressed against wet clay, a gesture left behind, its ridges softening with time. It is the scent of salt on an old coat, a fabric that holds the ghost of the ocean, though the water has long since dried. It is weight of a forgotten book, its spine bent where fingers once paused, where eyes trace words like footsteps on a well-worn path. Memory is sculpted in dust that clings to an untouched windowsill. In the imprint left by a head resting too long against a pillow, it is how laughter lingers in a room long after voices have hushed, a vibration caught in wood grain and wallpaper. It is a crack in the pavement that your feet unconsciously avoid, though you cannot remember when you learn to step around it. It is the flicker of a street lamp seen through a childhood window, the way it flickered then, the way it flickers now, unchanged, except for the eyes that watch it. A memory is not solid, but it is not formless either. It shifts, bends, and takes the shape of what holds it. A photograph curled at the edges, a song hummed under breath, a whisper traveling through time. What is the shape of your memory? A cup still warm from someone's touch, a door that never entirely closes, a river that never flows the same way twice. It is all of these, and none of them, and something in between. I just wanted to thank you, everybody, for being here. It is such a privilege to have this audience and to close the 4 weeks of incredible presentation. It is truly a really bittersweet moment, I think, for all of the graduates. And this is now a memory of another kind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. I really appreciated that in so many ways. I'm wondering if anybody has a question or a comment they'd like to make. Or you just need a moment to take it in. Joseph.
Joseph always goes first.
Somehow I did. Thank you, Gabriella, so much. It was so fascinating to hear your lecture. That was so great. I'm really interested in the recent textile works that you're doing. Could you just give us some technical details about, you seem to be choosing very specific types of kind of textured fabrics, and also just like the process of like sewing and stuffing and hanging these pieces. How did you go about making that particular work?
I think in general, the textile pieces, that was a little bit of a surprise for me, definitely. I was mostly working with photography in my undergraduate studies, and then I got a go-ahead in my first year from the faculty, and they're like, well, you have a studio, do whatever you like, and I definitely took them up on that. I wanted to choose textiles because it's something that you really spend, excuse me, a lot of time with. So it's very hands-on. And I wanted to work with them also because they just have such this idea of like, you can really want to touch it. If you see a textile within any type of a gallery space, I always want to just reach out and touch it and feel. And there's so many different things that I think textiles as well can convey, like the idea of it being porous and just like time with all these kind of loops. As how I learned to sew in the first place was, I guess, through my mother who taught me. I remember I was able to sew probably or sew at the age of 5. It's just something that we were taught as children. But then also another aspect of that was a really important relationship that I built with the Hadarite community here just outside of Saskatoon. They really taught me so much about sewing and how to be productive, and they really did lend a helping hand, so I really have to acknowledge that as well. I hope I answered your question. I'm not sure if I missed anything. Okay.
Lisa.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you so much, Gabrielle, for the fabulous presentation. I really loved how you wove all of these thoughts and memories together in what was a very well and poetically articulated talk. So I really enjoyed it a lot. My curiosity, I really like this idea that Gopnik put forward that you presented here about the lantern focus that children have. And it seems to me that that is also the way that you approach and look at the world in a certain degree, and I'm curious about that because we've seen so many examples of all of these things you've been all of these things you've been trying, which is so exciting for me to see that kind of breadth of exploration. My curiosity is that you've decided to keep things very separated from one another in terms of those material explorations, at least from what I've seen. So when we see a photograph, we see the photographs, then we see the sculptural installation, we have the video work. So I'm curious, now that you've had an opportunity to broaden your practice, if there's interest in bringing some of those elements together, because your practice to me seems to be all about weaving of these ideas and narratives. So that would be my curiosity. Thank you.
Well, that's a heavy question. I don't know if I can necessarily answer right away how I would be able to interconnect all of them. But I think what using a lot of different mediums allows me is probably just the freedom of like expression. And as I think as a master student, I also wanted to make sure that I don't really close myself in too deeply, but we are also really encouraged and taught to be able to focus our work a little bit better. So although maybe the mediums are a little bit all over the place, I think that I really found the focus which essentially all of the photographs and you have seen that you have seen here, and also the sculpture, textile work. It's not something that might make its way to the final show, but it was, I think, really essential for me to explore, to be able to get it to that final step, because now I feel like my work is a little bit more focused. Yeah.
Certainly. Sorry, Lisa.
I guess I see so much potential maybe in terms of taking the sculptures into the photo and the video and merging those. Sorry?
Can't see the lower part of this photo, but
I can't. You're right. Okay, so yeah, I guess this is exactly what I'm curious about starting to integrate. But maybe I'll ask a question then about the video that we saw at the very end. Was that footage from your time in Poland growing up? Because I was really excited by that video work, and I guess I also see potential of taking those actual documentation of your lived experience and bringing them and merging it together with this. And so I'm curious maybe if that's something that's of interest. Thanks.
I really do enjoy working with video, that's for sure. I guess maybe even I should go back to the fact that I think in a way the way I work is through several different media, and I have done that for a very long time, even in my undergraduate studies. Alison Norlin was my supervisor, and I did my BFA exhibit, and she said, well, Gabriella, this exhibit could essentially be 10 different exhibits. So I think there's something that I would like to preserve about maybe not like that idea that there's so many different elements coming to it, but I don't want to necessarily give up everything about myself as an artist. I would like to keep something that is really like truly myself. And if in the end is not maybe received, or if it's received that there's too many different elements, then I mean, as artists, I think we always have to kind of, it's like a little seesaw, right? So you have to balance it at one point, probably. As per video, that is a video of my homeland. It's a video that was taken at my first communion. That was essentially a very big event in a child's life. And a lot of these images that you saw, this is really the only tape that I have from when I was a child. So when I came across it again, when I found it again, I just thought that it would be a very interesting way to summarize the talk that I gave. And especially because at one point the video sort of cuts off because it's recorded over with some performance of a very famous Polish singer. So it's that idea of like rewriting the tape as well that's brought in here.
Jennifer.
That was wonderful to see the video. You've described yourself in these white dresses running around outside as a child. So it was really interesting to see this footage, and also what you just described about allowing, that it got interrupted and suddenly we're in a completely different place. So I really appreciate that about the last work, and with your voice over top of it. So just to respond to what you just described, thank you very much. I really enjoyed your talk. It was really interesting to see how you've brought all of these things together, and you've explored so many different kinds of media. And I think how you wove everything together worked really well. I'm trying to think of a question, and the one that I was kind of curious about is you have a real strength in working with and collaborating with others, and that's really clear in your documentary work when you engage with communities, with individuals, the performance work that you did. So I'm curious about that as you continue on in your practice, if you see that as something that you will continue to do, or how those things that you've learned from those processes might appear again or resolve themselves in some of the work as you move forward as in your own practice, even beyond your show. Yeah.
I think relationships are probably one of my favorite things about creating work, because it's almost like at one point you sort of become a family in a way with the people that you create with, do artwork with, or collaborate on a video installation or a photo shoot. So creating these relationships was not easy from the very beginning. It definitely took a lot of conversations over coffee or tea, and assuring that those relationships are going to be very respectful, and that the subject that is working with me, the person that's working with me, they can trust me, and we will definitely exchange ideas. So the relationships created with, you haven't seen any of the work, but for example, with the Hadarite community that I photographed in my, with anxious documents that we did together, that's a relationship that I've had with a community for pretty much now, coming up like 10 years. Doing work with Reina was amazing because she is also an artist herself, and she was very willing. We had an incredible time together, and if we had enough time, I could also, like, I would love to show you the videos that were behind the scenes where we were just interacting with each other. And I was then looking at those videos thinking that, you know, those interactions are just everything. They're almost as interesting as the video performance that I did after that. What I found, I think, also interesting about relationships is that in my undergrad, when I just moved here and I jumped straight into university, there was a lot of different barriers, not only a language barrier, but I also felt very withdrawn. I had no idea, like everything was so new. Just as for when the cohort girls came from Iran, it is a very daunting moment, and creating relationships is very hard. And that's the way I think it was very present in my undergraduate exhibit. It was called Katatonia, which is essentially that moment of like melancholy when you're so withdrawn and numb to everything because you can't really find yourself in a space. And as I entered the master program, I think I realized that if I don't reach out, I won't be able to create a relationship. So there was definitely that lesson there, that reaching out really creates the relationship, and you have to be the one to reach out.
Leah.
Thank you for your presentation. I particularly found it enjoyable to see all of the scholarship and theory that you've been looking at and how you tied it in. So thank you for sharing all of that. So my question is, with looking at your practice, there's a lot of text-based work, and whether you were literally using text in the work, or whether it be through poetry or spoken word. I won't conflate exactly what your process was, but also we saw text in the video pieces, and I'm just wondering if for you the ideas of text come before the work, or if that shapes the images for you, or what order, or if it comes after. If you want to just maybe talk about that process a little bit.
I think the words are always first, and then the work comes, and that's, I think, for many different reasons. But I think the spoken word, the written word, has always been really present in my life since I was a child. I went to a very rigorous high school that essentially was supposed to create the new journalists and people who are very well read, people who can then pursue a career in politics and be very well spoken. And the amount of reading that I had to do in that program was just so overwhelming. It wasn't always fun, it wasn't always easy, but now that I'm adult, I can definitely appreciate it because it has in a place such a huge role in my work. I know that at times, we even spoke about this in our last, I think, MFA crit, that there is a certain like resistance to using text in artworks. But for me, especially in the master's program, I feel that I can definitely find my way of introducing the text that can introduce and kind of be a little bit also like an added poignant, I guess, a point to what I'm trying to say through the work. I don't know if I'm explaining this properly, but yeah.
It definitely operates as another point of contact for you. You know,
Yeah.
it definitely brings into the room all of these things that people are describing as being woven together. And of course, I'm always excited to see the kind of research you've done here that is fully integral to your practice, that it's not an add-on or a desire to bring in art speak. It's actually integral to what you do. It's part of the logic of the work. And especially when addressing things like nostalgia and time, you know, some of the time being one of the biggest questions that our species addresses constantly, and a marker of colonial practices, as well as that experiential, bringing it back into the body, as you did through Sakula, as well as Svetlana Boym's understanding of the future of nostalgia, I think is something very valid, especially at this moment in time. And querying nationalism, you know, really considering what the complexities of that can be, because we understand it to be something that can be deeply negative. And as a recovering Catholic, I'm always a little bit scared of the evocation of the church, but also very excited that you've brought this in the depth that you have, and brought it into your realm of experience to be able to share with others, that it becomes not something to be joined into, but to be part of the formation of your work. And I appreciate the amount of time people have spent talking about the weaving together of these things. And we know that literature is kind of latent in your complete practice. So I think it's also generous to have shared that with everyone here today. We have time for just one more question. Does anyone have one, or will we? Cam, thanks.
Yeah, literature, story. You note story is important. And I also really appreciate this making. And I do think there are points where it does come together. And I appreciate like that you made that clay bit there, hey? And that's part of the photo. So I think like the photo is a part of your storytelling practice, isn't it? Like, is that
Yes. Yeah.
and it also can be an archive of performance or of making, and a place where like a kind of a knot where things can come together, different points, where textiles, like, you know, documenting them and how you document them can be part of the story too. Does that resonate with you at all, or is there something different about the photo than the document, or an archive of performance?
I think a lot of the images that you see, they're really layered because there is a lot of work that goes behind, I guess, the things that you see in the photographs is mostly the work that I would produce myself. As it finds its way into photography, I mean, for me, it's almost like also archiving through photography the things that I have produced. So layering the work is definitely a part, I think, of the process for me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for that observation, Cam, because, you know, the relationship between text, textos, and textile is really quite complete. and that making is central to all of it. The way you've constructed and woven all of these things together. I know you're always willing to be very hard on yourself, and you imagine you've been critiqued when you haven't been. So I want to make clear that I don't think people are seeing this is so disparate as much as there's this breadth you're bringing into it, and there's an opportunity to ask more questions about that. I'm saying that only with the most admiration and wanting you to hear fully what's being brought to you as you've brought us all so much today. So can I ask everyone to, again, thank you, Gabriella.
Thank you.
So please join us for some drinks and pears and see what you might remember.
Yes, please do. I need some.